Senator Lankford, if you'd like to recognize again, I'm happy to do that.
Senator Carper, thank you very much for that. Professor Muller, I want to ask you a couple of questions to be able to follow up on some of your statements earlier. You had talked about the difference in this bill, the H.R. 51 bill, and the way that it handles the 23rd Amendment. This bill says that we'll pass it, we'll declare D.C. a state, and then we'll get around to doing the 23rd Amendment to be able to change the electors issue that's hanging out there. You flipped that in your earlier statement in saying, why wouldn't this be conditioned on the 23rd Amendment being eliminated first to be able to make sure that there's not 3 additional electoral college? I think you mentioned for 59 people that would be in the new Capitol enclave at that point, that those 59 people wouldn't have 3 electoral college votes. Can you go into that a little deeper?
Sure. So the bill does anticipate an expedited repeal process. It could only do one thing, which is an article that says we repeal the 23rd Amendment. But until that happens, we have an enclave of around 59 people, some subset of that voters, who would then be eligible to choose 3 presidential electors. And so the thought is, well, if we can push people and hopefully wait and see what happens, and maybe the 23rd Amendment will be repealed. So there's no condition on that. There's no sort of hard rule. The hard rule is that Congress has to have a vote. There's no guarantee that 2/3 of each House of Congress does it. There's not going to be a time limit about when 38 or 39 states approve that amendment. So it's sort of waiting to see what will happen while the 23rd Amendment, giving 3 electoral votes to this enclave, sits there. So instead, another way might be to say, let's repeal the 23rd Amendment or put a condition in the 23rd Amendment saying, if the population of the district constituting the seat of government drops below a certain population threshold, then the 23rd Article of the Constitution is no longer in place. 23rd Article of Amendment no longer applies. And then that way we don't have these sorts of residual problems out there.
Right. Do you know of any issue with trying to be able to form that that way, what you're describing, as far as a constitutional issue or a problem with that?
No, I think you could develop a constitutional amendment that would condition the repeal of the 23rd Amendment on some future event, like retrocession or statehood for the district. You could also, I mentioned in my testimony some of the concerns about how to handle the capital voters left within that enclave. I think it's contested whether or not Congress has that power. I think a constitutional amendment that empowers Congress expressly to handle those voters left in the Capitol. You could certainly fashion amendments and think creatively about how to address that solution holistically on a constitutional side before you get to the statutory side.
Right, but either way, there's a tremendous number of constitutional issues that still have to be resolved. Obviously, the founders designed a capital region to never be a state. I mean, that was the design in the Constitution, to say this is uniquely so that the federal government does not exist under the authority of any state or trying to interact with the state. It was designed very particularly to be able to make sure that constitutionally there would always be a region that is there that was established, so the federal government didn't have to worry about what's state, what's federal, and living under that. So there are lots of constitutional questions here that the farther you go, the larger the constitutional questions get. Many of them are novel. They've never been addressed before. Obviously, the retrocession to Virginia of the southern portion of D.C. was never really resolved long term. That still hangs out there, but all the other constitutional issues still are reserved. Is that correct or not correct?
Right. There are a number of unsettled constitutional issues. You've heard about some of them today, and they've been written about for decades.
Right. 200 plus years, any individual that moves to Washington, D.C. understands that Washington, D.C. is unique. This is a place where you don't have a vote for a senator or a House member. Of late, of the last 100 years, we've had a delegate in the House. But it's been well known that when you move to Washington, D.C. at any point, you're moving to an area that doesn't have 2 senators or a House member, correct or not correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So when I look at it and just the transition of this, that is a given statement for anyone that's moving. My hometown of Oklahoma City is 10 times the size of Washington, D.C., but there are still individuals that want to live in Edmond or in Norman or in Moore or in Bethany, and they choose to be able to move out of Oklahoma City but still commute back and forth in other areas to be able to work or live because it's a choice that they make. In an area that is literally 1/10 of the size of my hometown of Oklahoma City, people have options to be able to still work and to be able to travel and to be able to move into other areas. If they wanted to be able to work in Washington, D.C., many people live in Maryland or in Virginia or in West Virginia and drive in to be able to be here from longer distances. But that's a volitional choice. No one's compelled to actually be here, knowing that that's been the situation for more than 200 years, correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lankford.